They broke through barricades, assaulted police, smashed their way into the Capitol, and sent lawmakers into hiding.
I hold the folks who broke into the Capitol with ill will in their hearts, destroying property, responsible for their actions. I don't hold the former president who didn't show up at the Capitol and threatened my life as responsible. So from my perspective, 99% of the folks who showed up at the Capitol were there to exercise their First Amendment rights. Those who broke into the Capitol, destroyed property, and then were willing to chase those of us in the Senate chambers, I hold them accountable.
Even though former President Trump, or President Trump at the time, tweeted, "Be there, will be wild," there's no level of culpability there?
I'm not saying there's no level of culpability. The question I'm answering is the one that I think is relevant, which is that who do I hold responsible for the actions on that day? I can only hold responsible the very people who threatened my life, and the former president did not threaten my life.
Welcome. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News, a 30-minute docuseries centered on the issues keeping Americans up at night. So if you're tired of politically spun, opinion-based news, and you're looking for a media report that speaks nothing to but fact, that's it, that just speaks to the facts, a breakdown of major cases today so you can walk away understanding what the real truth is, you're in the right place. Today, perhaps one of, or possibly, the most controversial show that we have done thus far, January 6th. What really caused it? Now, I know before you kind of step back and say, wait a second, I've heard a million reports on this already. Saw your B-roll in the front of the show. I get it. Let's put a couple of things on the plate before I introduce our esteemed panel. Number one is we understand the first word that comes to mind when you say January 6th is Trump, right? Former President Trump. And he caused it, he incited it, etc. There are so many different theories, there are so many different tidbits of information that are out there about January 6th that really prompted, that really promulgated us to say, you know, as a team, we need to lay the truth out. So in the next 26 minutes or so, we're going to sketch out exactly what caused January 6th. We're going to lay out why the People's House, Congress, that Capitol building that is esteemed all over the world, fell to, let's just say, ordinary Americans and a sprinkling of domestic terrorists. And how a building, the centerpiece of our democracy, how that could fall so easily and so quickly. Well, we're going to break that down, and we're going to break down exactly who's responsible for making that happen. I think you may be surprised when you get the facts, but as with all other cases, I'm going to put everything up on the screen. You're going to see exactly where the information came from. When we bring in the esteemed panel, we will break this down from a legal perspective, from a federal agent perspective, from a police officer, law enforcement perspective. We're going to break it down from each angle, factually based. So when you walk away at the end of the show today, when we hit the board and you break this thing down, you're going to see a lot more than probably you knew when you started out, when you started this show. So without further ado, let me break this down. So what was the real cause of this? Before I get into that, let me give you some background information on the United States Capitol and the United States Capitol Police. The United States Capitol Police is the only law enforcement agency in America that does not report to the executive branch. That's correct. They report to Congress. It's the only one that does that. Why is that important? Because as we break down the decision-making tree here in a minute, you're going to understand why that's so important as to the link to why this happened on January 6th. That's right. To say this was a trifecta of failure would be a gross understatement. So let's start with the U.S. Capitol Police structure. Right at the top, you have a board. And at the board, as opposed to like a normal law enforcement agency where you have a chief and you have really the chain of command, you have a Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, a House Sergeant-at-Arms, and the architect of the Capitol. Those three human beings make up the board, the governing board, that reports to special committee in Congress that runs the United States Capitol Police. What does that mean? It means that they handle everything from the selection process, the recruitment process, the training process, the arming process, the tactical response process, everything that has to do with the United States Capitol Police, those three human beings right there. That's it. That's all there is to it. So now, what does that have to do with us? U.S. Capitol Police chain of command. Now, this is important because decisions were made, as I'm going to bring up right now, in a timeline, factually, that speak without question as to who made the decision to protect or not protect the Capitol. Now, that assistant chief typically is the one in the Capitol Police chain that's going to advise the chief of that panel as to what type of action needs to be taken relative to whatever threats federal and state law enforcement agencies will share with the Capitol Police. As this breaks down, the information that comes in will come in at the corporal or sergeant level and then go to an inspector level. From there, it goes up to the assistant chief and the chief as to who makes the call to go to that panel I told you and say, we have received credible information from credible sources. Credible information from credible sources, the two things you need to hold on to. And we need to, as a result of that, make modifications. So as a brief example, before I get into this timeline, as a brief example, hypothetically someone were to call up the FBI, and I'm going to have a good friend of mine, a former supervisor special agent, that's going to be joining us shortly that will speak to that. But someone calls up the FBI has a credible source, and they say, okay, we know that John Doe is going to try to attempt to breach the Capitol building on November 1st. That information will then be shared. They will identify who that person is. They will make sure they take the necessary precautions to do what? To mitigate him outside. Right. Now, with all that being said, factually, let me tell you about the intelligence timeline, the intelligence failure that brought on January 6th. Dating back to October 1st, all factual information, and you can see this on your screen right now. On October 1st, the Department of Homeland Security provided the U.S. Capitol Police with an intelligence report. That intelligence report was specific enough to say that there was credible evidence that there would be an attempt to take over the Capitol building on January 6th. Again, this happened October 1st. November 9th, the FBI, the premier law enforcement agency in the United States, an FBI analyst sends an email to the U.S. Capitol Police providing similar information, but supporting the information they had previously received on October 1st from the Department of Homeland Security. What do we have? Credible source, Homeland Security, FBI, yes. Okay. Fast forwarding. December 17th, a tip comes to the FBI. FBI creates a memo. They send it to the U.S. Capitol Police, and they say there will be an attack on January 6th. And we are looking at different groups. We have chatter that we've been following. All right. They blow that off. December 19th, Capitol Police becomes aware of further social media activity that's brought forth by other federal agencies. They blow that off. Fast forward. December 22nd, the postal inspector gleans information, and we don't know exactly how they got it, but it doesn't matter. They have information that says, again, credible source, attack January 6th. All of this goes on to the U.S. Capitol Police. January 2nd, FBI and Homeland Security warn the U.S. Capitol Police there will be an attack on January 6th. Prepare for an attack. We are looking at domestic terror groups. We are looking at a variety of people that are voicing their plans. They are making plans. They are en route. If you can't say red flag right now, you're not paying attention. So now the U.S. Capitol Police has all this information. To say it's a plethora of intelligence would be a gross understatement. They have all this in hand. January 5th, Secret Service emails the Capitol Police. Federal Protective Service sends out a bulletin warning of the impending attack on January 6th. Going back to our chain of command, the House Sergeant at Arms, member of that U.S. Capitol Police board, makes a conscious decision not to protect the perimeter, not to bring in U.S. Capitol Police extra staffing, not to barricade that outer perimeter so that no one can come and breach the building. They make a conscious decision not to staff up tactically to prevent that attack. That's where that decision lies. Now, we understand that President Trump made a whole bunch of different statements. We understand that President Trump, and I'm not going to get into that specifically. I will tell you this, that yes, did he make a number of statements? Did he say things were going to be wild? Did he say history is going to be made? Did he say we're going to take back democracy? Did he say we're going to fight like hell? And again, you can see this on your screen, and you can go to the library. What we did was we went back, and our producers went back. Once again, Emily hit the cover off the ball on this. And we pulled every public statement that he made to see the language that he used. We will fight like hell. Everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. I'm going to stop there because I want to, before I introduce our panel, I want to make a point. Here's the point. Am I a fan of Donald Trump? No, absolutely not. End of story. I'm not a fan. I think that he did some really good things when he was in president. Okay, my opinion. This place isn't about an opinion. This show is not about opinion. I say this only because I want to be very clear, I'm not a fan. I'm a fact guy. And the facts are, as we introduce our panel right now, that the U.S. Capitol Police knew this was going to happen. They didn't take appropriate action. They didn't take action to avert the situation, and we lost the people's house on January 6th. My panel today, Vincent Ancona, our show's legal analyst, is joining us right now. You remember Brent Jex, Brent, from the Utah State Lodge of the Fraternal Order of Police from Utah, retired detective, great friend. And another great friend, former supervisory special agent from the FBI, Dennis Franks, all joining us right now for their perspective. Vincent, first question comes to you. Legally, did what President Trump state in public constitute the incitement of the riot, or was it protected First Amendment speech?
It comes down to, Paul, whether or not it's beyond a reasonable doubt if what Donald Trump said would specifically advocate for violence or lawlessness after his speech. The words that he said, we must fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, we're not going to have a country anymore. Those are the words that are going to be the test for whether or not it falls under the Supreme Court's Brandenburg test. And that test is simple. Is your speech inciting lawlessness? Now, the question can be made that he's just saying, we need to fight for your rights. The question can be made that he's saying you need to fight physically. That's really where it comes down to. Now, you also have to realize Donald Trump, right after he said that, he also said we're going to march down to the Capitol building and peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So the test for beyond a reasonable doubt in this becomes a really slippery slope, which I'm not sure that a prosecutor is going to be able to get to based on that. And there's another point, Paul, that's pretty important. Imminence. The imminence of what your speech is and what it will do immediately after you give that speech. I think the timeline from Donald Trump giving the speech in one location, I think it was at the Ellipse, and then having to walk down to the Capitol, there's a timeline there that's not imminent and immediate right after his speech. I think that break in time helps him in a criminal case, if in the event that he's charged that way.
Okay, so that being said, piggyback question on that. Were Trump's actions clear evidence justifying impeachment then?
Now, when you're talking about impeachment, that's a different standard, Paul. That's a different standard altogether, and what they can do in the House and in the Senate is completely different from what you could do in a criminal courthouse. What I would say to you was they would have a similar uphill battle because using the words fight and strength may not necessarily be enough to talk about incitement and riot.
Interesting. Okay, great. Dennis, to you, was this, and let's draw upon your experience as a supervisory special agent with the FBI, as a SWAT team leader, as an attorney. Let's draw upon your wealth of knowledge, especially when it comes to counterterrorism in the United States. Would you say this is domestic terrorism? And if so, why?
Yeah, I would say it's domestic terrorism because domestic terrorism is basically defined as an effort to to seek and further political or social goals through unlawful means. And if there's an effort to overthrow the government, you know, if one person was responsible for this or not, that's another question. But the acts taken were, in my opinion, definitely an effort to overthrow the government. So in that case, it was domestic terrorism, yes.
Okay. So given, again, your experience in counterterrorism and protecting our country for over 2.5 decades with the FBI, obviously a valid source in order to comment on this, what message do you think, Dennis, and for all of our viewers that are watching right now, what message do you think January 6th, these actions by domestic terrorists, sent to international terrorists around the globe?
You know, it's a really good question because I think that international terrorists have basically taken a different approach, but they're definitely going to learn from this, and I think they have. That, you know, instead of using, you know, planes and bombs and trying to bomb buildings and ships and everything, you know, maybe there's some other approaches we can take, such as, you know, inciting riots, infiltrating government buildings, you know, power plants, you know, things of that nature, which I think that's already on their radar. But I think it certainly provided them a roadmap to how to affect, you know, it's something with major consequences without necessarily killing a lot of people.
That's pretty damn frightening when you think about it.
It is.
Brent, to you, and for those of you that remember Brent Jex, FBN's law enforcement analyst. Brent, you spent a lot of time on the SWAT side. From a tactical perspective, what did the Capitol Police know based upon provided intelligence, and were they prepared tactically?
Well, I think the obvious question is that no, they weren't prepared. But Paul, I got to tell you, I got a couple of problems with how this whole scenario plays out. I've got some really good friends with Capitol Police. Some of them that were working that day. I've talked to them since. I've also talked to others that were around that complex that day. The intelligence that was coming in wasn't just set aside. It was acknowledged and it was shut down. The concerns that the line and the first line level of Capitol Police officers that were there that day that were charged with protecting the house, the information that was coming through was like herding cats. You know, they're getting intel on this front of protecting this side, and the entire Capitol was not surrounded. It was very segmented in this, you know, to where I heard direct testimony from one person whose office looked at the area of the Capitol that was not surrounded, and from her office, she had no idea that anything was going on. And so I think there's more at play than just a normal, you know, think back to the riots of 2020. You know, we had intel coming in cities all across the country, and we saw examples of great jobs at defending Capitol buildings, and we saw poor jobs where orders to stand down were given and a lot of damage was done. This is no different. It's no different. You can't expect for a proper protection to happen when orders to stand down, when orders to ignore intelligence are given, and when you take policing into a political realm. Politics shouldn't be in the realm of enforcement, and sadly, we're plagued throughout the country with this idea and this notion that all enforcement is political.
Which goes to my earlier point then, Brent, is that you've got a solid group of men and women protecting their capital. But if that leadership doesn't direct in the proper way and we don't make the decisions to prepare properly, you can't point the fingers at the guys on the ground. You need to point the finger where the blame belongs. And the blame belongs at the people that made a conscious decision not to prepare for it. Am I on the right page here?
Yes.
Okay.
to include, now the thing you got to keep in mind is that the Senate Sergeant at Arms, the House Sergeant at Arms, there's a reporting line that the Speaker of the House is ultimately responsible for the overlooking the security of that complex. And I've heard it from 3 or 4 different independent sources that the security plan that was originally conjured up by Capitol Police and their intelligence division and their tactical units was shut down by the Speaker's office.
Pelosi. And this isn't a politically spun statement. This is a factual statement.
Factual statement.
Okay, so now if everyone watching it now, hold on to that. Final question, and this goes to everybody. Brent, I'll start with you. Knowing that, how do we prevent this from happening again? Or do we?
We've got to take the enforcement and the protection out of the political realms. We've got to stop. And Paul, this isn't just with Capitol Police. This isn't just with Secret Service. This isn't just with FBI. This includes every police department across the country where decisions are being made by political appointees that are more concerned about their jobs than they are about doing what's right.
Amen.
They're more concerned about following an order blindly because it's going to cost them their job than saying, I'm not going to let what my friends have gone through since then, 2 of my buddies were friends with the officer that took his own life afterwards because of the pressure and because of the negative, overwhelming circumstances that happened with all that. And these guys are the ones that are getting beat up. They're the ones that are getting ridiculed. And it's all because we've got political appointees that are sitting in protected seats because they did what the uppers were bidding, and they're sitting protected, and it's the line level that's taking the brunt. It's the same with Capitol Police, with Secret Service, with FBI, with police departments across the country. The line is taking the beating.
And that is the issue that we're uncovering today. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Brent. Dennis, same question to you. How do we prevent this from happening again, or do we?
I think Brent's points were just absolutely phenomenal statements, and to the point. In bureaucracies, there's it's not politics. I mean, I think there's some perception that politics has been involved in the FBI decisions in recent years, and that's a whole other topic. I don't see that, but I see where there can be at the top. There's a bureaucracy. There's a bureaucratic creep that gets involved, where those who want to aspire to higher positions are afraid to make decisions oftentimes, and these decisions can be crucial, whether it's for or against or whatever it might be. And it's the people on the streets, on the front lines that pay the consequences, and that usually know more about what's going on than somebody sitting in a headquarters level, or and particularly in a position that has some political ramifications.
So at the end of the day, would you then concur with Brent that we need to take the politics out of policing?
Absolutely, that's without a doubt.
Okay.
How you do that, especially on local levels with police, with the mayors and police chiefs and that, city managers, that's a whole nother can of worms.
That's 5 shows altogether right there, brother. I'll say it. There's no doubt about that. Vincent, I'm coming back to you. Last question before we tie it for the day. How do we prevent this from ever happening again, Ben?
Paul, from a legal perspective, you can go back and forth on what he did or shouldn't have done and what he said and what he shouldn't have said. I think from a very simple perspective that we're still talking about this so many years later, how about we just do this? How about we use common sense? When you see a group of people that's in front of you that's all charged up, take it down a notch. That's not it. It's that simple. You want to aspire to higher office, you need to have a common sense approach to what's in front of you in this new age that we live in. And I think if you apply that common sense application to this scenario, we wouldn't even be talking about it.
But you know what's funny, though, Ben? Right next to Jumbo Shrimp, common sense is one of the greatest oxymorons of all time. If it was so common, everybody'd have it. So I think we're in an uphill battle when it comes to preying on it. We get common sense, although I agree with you 100%, brother. I agree with you 100% on that. I really do. Vincent, Dennis, Brent, thank you so much, each one of you, for weighing in on this. And stay with us right now, because we're going to finish up today by going to the board, and we're going to tap into everything the guys just said. So as we switch to the board, some things that we need you to remember, some things I beseech you, please, please remember these final points as we close out for today. January 6th was an event that changed our country. It was one of the most prolific attacks against our democracy. And we must remember what this is all about and how it actually happened. Vincent, Dennis, Brent raised excellent points. And we need to take these are facts. They're not opinions. They're not a group of guys that are making it up as they go along or looking to impress one side of the aisle or the other. Those were facts. So when we go to the board, I ask you to remember this. Point 1. Remember what I said about the trifecta of failure. A failure culturally, a failure tactically, and a failure through the bequeath of intelligence to the operators that could have prevented it. Those are the 3 things you need to remember, because that sums up that day. That's where we failed. 2, the timeline of events tells it all. And it piggybacks on what Brent said, because we go back to October 1st. We work our way to January 6th. The major agencies in our country told the leadership of the United States Capitol Police what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, who was involved, hell, who was driving there. And they didn't give the officers on the ground the wherewithal to protect your house. Bottom line. And as we learned from Brent, that went right up to the Speaker's office, Pelosi. Is that a political statement? No. It's a damn fact. Okay. The disregard, number 3, the disregard of U.S. Capitol Police leadership to prevent this riot. Do not forget that. I am not defending Trump. I am not sitting here singing his praises. I am not doing that. End of story. I'm just not. But the fact is, and I think Vincent brought up a great point about the language and what's protected and what's not protected. The fact is, it was the D.C. Capitol Police leadership that dropped the ball and allowed this to happen. Fact. 4, the mix of regular citizens and domestic terrorists that took over the People's House that day sent, as Dennis echoed, a horrible, horrific, threatening message to American democracy, all the way to our international terrorists that are camped out here because they gave them a blueprint to our vulnerability to the People's House. You want to send a message? Take over the Capitol building. Because a bunch of regular Americans sprinkled in with some domestic terrorists and domestic terrorist groups took control over it. Think about that. And number 5, the message we never need to send again to the world is weakness, vulnerability. This is a message we should never send. And I cannot agree with Brent more on his final point. I agree with all the guys, but I agree with Brent on his final point. Dennis echoed it. You heard it from Vincent, and yeah, you hear it from me. Our final point, ladies and gentlemen, as far as the Capitol, U.S. Capitol Police needs to be restructured. Congress needs to remove them from a reporting structure, reporting directly to Congress. The Speaker shouldn't have a damn thing to do with managing that police department. And it should be independent like any other federal agency and report to the executive branch. 3 levels of government, that doesn't need to happen. And as far as political decisions coming into play in police tactical response, well, you can see how well that plays out. So as we tie this up, let's remember what really caused January 6th, but most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, let's remember how we prevent it from happening again. I'm Paul Viollis, and this is Fact-Based News.